Hi, this is Eric White. Sometimes when building a Windows Forms application, you might want to display a preview of an Open XML WordprocessingML document. Maybe you're selecting a particular portion of a WordprocessingML document. Then you use Document Builder to extract a certain portion of that document, and you want to display that portion of a document in a Windows Form application. This is actually pretty easy. I'm going to walk through how to do this in this screencast. I'm going to use the HTML converter class in Power Tools for Open XML, and I'm going to use the web browser control in a Windows Form application to display the HTML that I convert the word processing ML to. I'm going to start with the core code for Power Tools for Open XML. This core code contains classes for manipulating Open XML documents, but it doesn't contain all of the code to implement the commandlets, the PowerShell commandlets. Given that we're writing a C# program right now, I don't need all of that code that is there to write commandlets. Instead, I just need the core code. If you go to the Power Tools for Open XML site on Codeplex, which is powertools.codeplex.com, the core code is this code right here, the Power Tools Core 2.2. This is what I'm using for this example right here. First thing, extract those files. Within here, we can see all of the directories for all of the projects for each of the examples for the core code. However, I don't want to add my project to this solution here. Instead, I'm going to build a new solution just for this project. I'll start Visual Studio. I'll create a new project. It'll be a Windows Forms application. This is under the Windows templates. I'll create a new directory, DisplayDocxInWinForm. I'll select that directory. I'll name my Windows Forms application DisplayDocxInWinForm. I'm going to create a directory for the solution because I'm going to also have a project in this solution for the Power Tools core code. Click OK. First thing I'm going to do is get all of the Power Tools code into this project. So I am going to add a new project. It's going to be a Windows.NET Framework 4 class library, and I'll call this Open XML Power Tools. I don't need class1.cs, so I will delete it. And now I'm going to go into the Open XML Power Tools folder in the core Power Tools project, and I'm going to grab all of the C# modules, but I'm not going to take the project. I don't need that. I'll copy all of those to the clipboard, and I'll come to my new Open XML Power Tools folder in my new project, and I'll paste all of those modules. Now go back to Visual Studio, and I am going to add existing items, and I'll add all of those C# modules. I'll need to add some references here. I'll need to add the document format.openxml, in other words the OpenXML SDK. I'll need to add system.drawing and the Windows base assemblies. And click Add. Let's build that, and it does build, so we're in good shape there. Now I'm going to need to also add references to this DisplayDocxInWinForm project. I'll want to add document format.openxml, system.drawing, and Windows base. In addition, I am going to add a reference to a project. I'll add a reference to my Open XML Power Tools project so that it pulls in all of the Power Tools core code. And now I'm ready to start building my Windows Forms application. I'll double click here, and now I've got a web browser control, but I want to have other controls here. So I'm going to not anchor this to the top and left. I'll anchor it to the right. Do a little bit of resizing to get it to be the right size. I'm going to set a couple of properties to false here. I don't want to allow web browser drop. In other words, I don't want to allow the user to be able to drag and drop an HTML page onto this browser control and have this browser control go navigate to that URL. That's not what the purpose of this browser control is for. The purpose of it is just to display my Word document. And in addition, I am going to set allow navigation to false. So if the Word document that I'm displaying contains some hyperlinks, I don't really want the user to be able to click on those hyperlinks and go to the destination of that hyperlink. Again, that's not what this is for. It's just for displaying the Word document. I'll also want a button over here. So I'll put a button here. And I'll change the text to View DocX. Now I'll double click on View DocX button so that I can enter some code into the click event for this button. Going to declare some variables in my class, the HTML base name, the HTML file name, and the image directory name. And then when the user clicks the button, first thing to do is put up the open file dialog. I'm going to set the option of multi-select to false. Then I'll show the dialog, and if the user clicked OK, then I'll verify that they only selected one document, and then call this method viewWordDoc. In order to use that class file info, I need to come up here and include system.io. Okay, now I have pasted in this method viewWordDoc. This method viewWordDoc is very similar to the HTML converter example that can convert a document and can also use a CSS for that document. This is going to be important. I'm going to do something fun with that CSS in a little bit here. I need to have a using document format.openxml.packaging, and I also need to add a using for OpenXML Power Tools. Also need system.xml.link, and I need using system.drawing.imaging. The way this code works is that when the user clicks the button, it calls viewWordDoc. In viewWordDoc, it first initializes the CSS string, and then it initializes a few names of files and directories. Because we are displaying an HTML document, and because an HTML document as such can't be monolithic, in other words, it can't contain the images that the HTML document needs to refer to, the way you do this is that you have an HTML document and then you have a folder next to the HTML document, and inside that folder are all the images, and then you set up the references in the HTML document to point to those images in the folder as appropriate. This is how the HTML converter examples work. So we're going to follow the same approach here. One thing that we're going to do different here is that when we convert a docx to HTML, we're always just going to use the HTML base name of temp. So the name of the HTML file will be temp.html, and the image directory name will be temp_files. And down at the bottom of the method calls navigate, passing in a URI that is initialized to the full name of the HTML file name, and then it calls refresh. There's one last thing that we need to do, which is, in order to make a nicely behaved application, I want to add a bit of code to delete all of the temporary files in that temporary directory when this window closes. I'll come over to the form. I'm going to click on the form here so that I can get to the events for the form itself. I'm going to add an event for the form closing event. I'll double click there. And now I have an event handler for form closing. I've pasted a bit of code in there. The first thing that it does is it iterates through all the files in the image directory and deletes those files. It then deletes the directory for the images, and then it deletes the HTML file itself and sets e.cancel to false, which will enable this window to close. And that's all we have to do here. Let's run the application. I'll click View DocX. Now I can browse to a document. I'll click this blog overview document. And there's the document. I can click over here and scroll up and down. If I open that same document up in Word, I can see it looks remarkably similar. And now back in my Windows Form application, I can navigate to another document and click Open, and there's the other document with the contents of that document. But one thing that you'll notice here is that this title up here, this testing 1, 2, 3, it's just in a Times New Roman font. But if I open up another document, that testing 1, 2, 3 is styled with the title style, and it doesn't look the same. So let's do something to take care of this. And this is just a little trick that you can do with the HTML converter. What I can do is I'll click File, and I'm going to click Save As. I'm saving this document, this another document.docx. I'm not going to save it as a docx. I'm going to save it as a web page. And I'll do a web page filtered because I don't need anything that would be there if I didn't have a filtered web page. I want to keep this as simple as possible. And I'll click Save. Word tells me that I'm not going to be able to save all the features in that document, and that's fine with me. I'll close that, and I'll close Word. There is the another document.htm, and I'm going to open this with Notepad. And what I want is I want these CSS style definitions that Word saved. So here's the style element in that HTML document. I'll come down within that style element. I'll go down below the artificial comment start. We don't need that. And I'm going to page down through the end of the CSS declarations and copy all of that to the clipboard. And one thing that you'll notice here is the class name for instance, the title class is MSO title. We're going to want that information here in just a minute. Now I'm going to go back up to the top of this form1.cs. I'm going to if false this declaration of the CSS information. And I'm going to paste in all of the CSS that I just retrieved from that HTML that I saved with Word. And of course this has double quotes in there. I'll select all of that text in the CSS declarations. I'll type Control-H and I'll replace double quote with single quote. And that's going to replace everything that was selected at that point. So now I have a properly formatted string. There's the string CSS, and it has all of the CSS declarations, and all of the CSS declarations now use a single quote, so we have valid syntax. And there's one more thing to do, which is down here in the HTML converter settings, we can set this field CSS class prefix, and instead of setting it to PT, I'm going to set it to capital MSO. So what this means is that when the HTML converter generates a class for a paragraph that is styled with title, the class is going to be MSO title, and that's going to match this p.mso title in the CSS declarations. I'll save everything and run it. Now I'll click View DocX. I'll click another document and click Open. And what we see is that it didn't pull up the underlining of that title paragraph, but it did use the right font. And further down here, it used the right font and the right colors for the heading 1 and heading 2. And it used the correct fonts down here for the text underneath the headings. And because this document is formatted very similarly to the blog overview document, if I click on that, the same thing applies. I'm using the CSS that was generated by Word. The code is generating class names to use that CSS, and now we can take advantage of that CSS in the display of the HTML in our Windows Forms application. That's all I'm going to cover in this screencast. Thanks for watching.